Hey guys, welcome back to Mystery Garage. Today's the day we find out if the car starts. Let's get to it. Alright, there's a couple things we want to go over today. First off, we want to make sure the car's got clean fuel. I addressed that in the last episode. We talked quickly about how the tank might have rust in it, so we just want to make sure that whatever fuel the pump is bringing in is clean, it's not varnished, all that sort of thing. For what I can understand, this project's been up on that container for about 10 years, so I totally imagine this fuel is toast. I just want to make sure it's not gelled, make sure it's not full of rust, all that sort of thing, so I'll show you how to do that. We then want to make sure the pump runs. Pump on these cars are high pressure pumps, they're Bosch 44 pumps, so we want to make sure that the pump is on with ignition. Next up, before we fire the engine, we always want to check to make sure there's any oil in it, make sure there's enough oil to get us going. It doesn't have to be super clean oil because it is just making sure the car starts. Then we want to try and manually turn the car over, make sure there's nothing stopping it from cranking. Next, we want to quickly, once we have got it to crank, we want to make sure we got spark. We will check the spark plugs real quick, make sure they're good, and then we'll give it an opportunity to fire up. So let's get at it. Okay, so there's a couple things I want to go over real quick. It's kind of some of the standard tools I usually grab. So on my tray here, I usually get starter fluid in case we need it. Got a WD-40 type cleaner, penetrant, brake clean in case I need that, wrenches, sockets, screwdrivers, that sort of thing. Got an empty bucket for catching any fluids I might drain, especially the fuel. Got some clean fuel, got a jack in case we need it, especially get to that pump, and I'll show you guys where the pump is. And then currently I don't have a battery for this car, so I'm going to try and jump it from the starting of a battery charger, but if that doesn't work, I'll go grab one. And then I'll quickly walk over the car, show you guys a few things about the fuel system on this car, and then we'll go from there. Alright guys, let's quickly discuss this fuel system. I'll give you guys a little bit of know-how about how this kind of all works. In the back of the engine compartment here, you're going to have your two supply lines, supply and return. This is your supply line of fuel from the pump. This is your return back to the tank. Fuel comes up from the pumps, so the pump is electronic, it's in the back next to the tank. Comes up here, fuel goes into the fuel filter, which is this Bosch unit here, comes out of here and goes into a fuel distributor. This is a constant rate fuel system, so inside of this intake valve is basically a bellows that moves with the engine's vacuum. So as the engine has more vacuum, it sucks open that bellows, allowing more fuel into the metering block. And the metering block sends consistent fuel to all four fuel injectors, following the fuel injector lines to the fuel injectors there that just have a constant spray. And there's also a fifth injector that leaves from the center here. That's actually an electronic injector that's inside of the fuel system for cold starting. I'm also slightly that may be used also for high RPM driving. I'm not positive on that. I'm sure somebody will correct me in the comments, but I do know for sure it's for cold start. So one thing I want to make sure I do is the fuel lines, once I clean the fuel tank and put new fuel in it, once the pump turns on, I want to make sure that there's clean fuel coming out here. I want to try and undo it pre-filter to ensure I'm not filling the filter with rust from the tank. So we're going to run it for a little bit, make sure it's clean. I will probably prime this fuel line a little bit with some carb cleaner to ensure there's not a lot of gumming in that distributor block. But that's the way we're going to check the fuel system. So let's go to the pump first. So the pump on these cars is located right in front of the rear passenger side wheel. It's actually right under there. It's where the tank also feeds that pump. So what we're going to do is hop onto the car. I'm going to undo the fuel line that goes from the tank to the pump and drain the tank. So let's do that. All right guys, this is the view from underneath the car. As you can see here, the fuel pump's right there. Outlet from the pump is up in here. Inlet is in the back. So this is the fuel line here. It's kind of hard to see, you guys, sorry. This is the fuel tank, and the line comes from here into the back of the pump. So we're going to undo this line here, drain the tank if there is anything indeed in the tank, and then take a look at the condition of the fuel as it comes out, and take a look at what we should be doing. I will probably afterwards pour a little bit of fuel into the tank to finalize the draining, to see if it comes out clean. We'll hook this back up and then test the pump. All right, as you guys can see, we ran into our first issue. Doesn't seem to be fuel coming out of the tank, so I went and grabbed a green wire. As you can see, I tried to push that through to see if I couldn't clean up a blocked line. Didn't seem to do anything, so we'll go get my compressor now and I'll blow back through that line and see if I can't force something out to see if it's on the other end. All right, problem resolved. So I ended up cleaning the line with the air. Nothing seemed to be coming out. So I decided I'd top up the tank with even more fuel to see if it wasn't just really low. And sure enough, fuel started flowing out real clear. Obviously the first few spills were a little bit varnishy, but then as soon as the fuel started flowing through real strong, it was real clear. So I threw the line back on, and now we're ready to move to step 2 and check out that pump. First thing I'll do is I'll energize the battery cables real quick. I'll undo the fuel line at the fuel filter, and then we'll turn on the ignition to see if the pump primes and brings fuel up to the filter. Okay, let's go. Well guys, success. As you can see here, this is the input side to the fuel filter. I just charged the battery with the battery charger, or sorry, just charged the car with the battery charger. I'm gonna go turn on the ignition and you can watch the fuel prime from here. So as you can see, we're getting lots of clean fuel. All right, let's move on to seeing if the motor rotates. All right, before we see if the motor rotates, let's check the oil real quick. There's oil on there, it's about half. It's not the greatest condition oil. It's not terrible either, it's not completely black, but what we're gonna do is we're gonna see if it turns over first, and if it does start, then I'll probably give it an oil change. We'll see. All right, to see if the motor turns over, we're gonna put a ratchet on the crank, give it a few spins and see what happens. Oh. She's rock solid. Well, it looks like we ran into problem number 2. The engine doesn't seem to be cranking over, so I think what we'll do is we'll remove all the spark plugs, and I have some Marvel mystery oil that we'll throw in each cylinder and let it sit while we do a couple of the other things and see if we can't get it to loosen up. Well, cylinder 1 looks corroded shut on the spark plug. Cylinder 2's got carbon, but it looks clean. Cylinder 3, same as 2. And cylinder 4 is cleaner than 2 and 3, but as you can see if you can see this, cylinder 1, I don't know if it'll focus there, you can see the electrode is shut. So my guess is that this is the cylinder that had open valves and accepted oxygen for all that time. So what we'll do is we'll focus on that cylinder for the Mr. Oil, a little bit more in that cylinder than the others. We'll get this cleaned up, we'll get Mr. Oil in the others, and we'll try and crank it by hand with nothing in the cylinder, hoping we can't do something about this one. Well, spark plugs are clean now. I don't know if that'll focus on that, but if we can't get this thing to turn over, we're dead in the water. So we'll give that a shot. All right, we'll thread these spark plugs back in, and haven't seemed to have any luck with being able to turn the motor over. So there's a chance we may have to dive in a little deeper. Not one of my steps, but might be necessary. Well guys, we seem to have hit a roadblock. We were moving along pretty nicely. You know, we were able to empty the fuel tank. Luckily there was not much fuel in it, so I don't know if that was luck or that was the fact that maybe it had evaporated or something, but running new fuel in there, it didn't show a lot of varnish, so that means generally speaking there's not a lot of fuel sitting in there that's dried up, so I don't think it was evaporated. Maybe it was ran out of fuel, I'm not really sure. Nevertheless, the pump works. Pump brings fuel to the front. We had oil. It wasn't great oil, but it wasn't terrible. It was enough to definitely start the motor on. Went over to the turnover section, and that's where we hit our roadblock. No matter what I can do, I can't seem to get this motor to turn. I was able to push the car around, so I know in neutral functions properly. Pushing the car in first or second, it wants to grab, which means the clutch is functioning. Putting it in neutral, pushing it in neutral, doesn't push either, so the clutch is grabbing. Put it back in neutral, everything works. So the clutch is functioning. I just can't seem to get the motor to turn over. So I went to the next step as kind of a last-ditch effort to see if I couldn't get something to happen today. You know, obviously earlier you saw me put Marvel Mr. Oil in. That oil works pretty good for some semi-stuck rings and things like that, but you generally don't want to use it on a motor that's completely stuck shut. You know, ATF or Marvel Mr. Oil, if you give it enough time to sit, you know, there's arguments to be made that, yeah, maybe it could work in time. However, that being said, I'm going to let it sit. I've done everything I can. Really, this motor is a lump for now. So I'll show you what I did. I took the oil pan off, got underneath, and I tried to use a pry bar to get that crank to rotate. You don't want to put too much stress on the 19 mil bolt that is on the end of the crank pulley, so I tried to go to the next step and see if I couldn't get anything to turn. Again, like I said, no dice. So I'll quickly show you that. As you can see, guys, I blasted off the oil pan. Again, a little bit of sludge in there, but not terrible. Definitely cleanable. Only thing that's kind of a little bit unnerving is the grease that's right there, but it's not terrible. But what is terrible is this motor won't crank. I can't do anything to get it to crank. Pry bars, anything like that, even putting them onto the lobe so I'm not damaging the crank or any of the rods or anything. It just won't turn. You can only put so much stress on this 19 bolt on the pulley here. I feel like it's going to break at some point. I'm putting so much force on it. Like I said, I checked the trans. The trans isn't stuck, so it's not an issue with that. It's just this thing won't move. So I think what we'll do is let that Marvel mystery oil sit for a while. I'll put this pan back on. But unless anything happens with that, this motor's more or less roached. Well, in today's episode, we gave it a shot, and it didn't really go our way. You know, that's the way it goes sometimes when you're old car hunting. But truth of the matter is, I didn't want to say it too early. We weren't going to be using that motor anyways. So, not a total loss. Positive things that came out of the episode. Fuel tank semi is fairly clean. You know, fuel system works. When you charge it with power, it comes on, brings fuel to the front. Those are all positive things that'll keep this project moving. Next episode, we'll take the car out and we'll clean it up. But thanks everybody for tuning in for today. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe to this channel. Keep following this build. Like I said, we're gonna get this car out, gonna clean it up, gonna clean out the interior, spruce everything up, and get ready for that little secret I have waiting on the other side of the shop. Till next time, guys, take care.